Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tezenghausen. Today is November 15th and we have a packed episode ahead. So, in this episode, a daring GUR operation, an explosion on the Trans-Siberian Railway, and the blockage of a key Russian artery. Novorossiysk is on fire, and Ukrainian missiles are changing the rules of the game. And several Russian oil refineries have halted their operations at once. News from the Crimean, partisans, how they're scrapping the Black Sea Fleet for metal, and much more. Medvedev has publicly admitted to his own crimes and Zakharova is accusing the US, you won't believe what of. Russia is preparing to disconnect from the global internet as early as next spring. Events are accelerating. All this and more in today's episode. If you're new to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. So, Medvedev has called the war in Ukraine the bloodiest conflict of the 21st century. I don't know, it's some kind of mental disorder to publicly admit to your own crimes and even emphasize just how inhumane they are. So, you attack your neighbor, wage war for a fourth year after a full-scale invasion, have caused the deaths of over 1 million Russians, and demand the return of Ukrainian lands that you can't seize by military means. And you even emphasize that this is the bloodiest war you've started. Well, I don't know. There will be another statement from Zakharova. I have a theory as to why they're talking about this. But let's talk now about direct sanctions. An explosion on the Trans-Siberian Railway. A military intelligence operation has blocked the Kremlin's key logistical artery, report that near the settlement of Sosnovka in the Khabarovsk region, an explosion occurred that blocked cargo traffic on the Trans-Siberian Railway. By the way, this key railway artery of the Russian Federation is also used to transport weapons and ammunition received from North Korea. So, a very successful operation. They planted an explosive device, detonated it at the right moment, and the freight train derailed. Off the tracks, and well, there you have it, deal with the consequences. Yes, they'll restore it, but as a result of such an operation, there will be major logistical disruptions for a long time, first of all. And secondly, Russia is so enormous that it has become a hostage to its own vast territory of 17 million square kilometers. That is, it's impossible to effectively fight partisans on such a territory. And even more so with experienced partisans like the GUR. There are also direct sanctions. The Russian port of Novorossiysk has suspended oil exports after an attack by Ukrainian missiles and drones. Reuters reports that, in general, this is an extremely serious event. The Russian port of Novorossiysk is the largest in Russia for handling all types of cargo, including containers. In other words, it's simply the largest oil transshipment port on the Black Sea. That's why at Transneft, by the way, which owns the oil pipeline, they refuse to comment on when oil transshipment would resume. Overall, this was a very, very significant strike. By the way, it has become known that the special operation to strike the oil terminal was carried out by Alpha SBU Special Forces together with the GUR, the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the State Border Guard Service, and in general, our coastal missile and artillery troops. All in all, it was extremely impressive. In just 1 week, 2 ports were put out of commission, Tuapse and Novorossiysk. At this rate, Putin will soon have to carry oil to his buyers by the bucket himself. If only we could reach the ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga. That would be perfect. By the way, they say the container terminal at the port of Novorossiysk was also damaged. But the key point here is, in the other one, missiles struck. Moreover, it was a combined operation. First, it was necessary to take out the air defense systems, and there are a lot of them there. And now OSINT specialists suggest that at the moment of the strike, and you probably saw that explosion, a massive detonation, at the very moment the air defense systems were hit, up to 7 S-400 launchers that were covering this crucial port could have been within the impact zone. For Russia, it's just perfect. First, the air defense systems are disabled, then they hit the terminal precisely. Bravo, what else can you say? Let's add to this, the Saratov oil refinery has completely shut down after strikes by Ukrainian drones. Literally just yesterday it was hit, and now it's a complete shutdown. So now the strikes are serious, and they're accurate. In the context of the previous news about the port of Novorossiysk, it's important to note that when a drone hits the primary oil processing unit, that's the most critical component at any refinery. If it's put out of commission, There won't be any secondary processing or anything else until this unit is repaired. So, when a drone arrives, the Russians have somehow learned to cope. They cover this primary unit with nets. But when a missile with a warhead weighing a third of a ton hits, and the Neptune has over 300 kilograms, whether you cover it with a net or not, there will be nothing left of that unit. And that's not all. Last night, another oil refinery stopped working, this time in Ryazan. Drones hit there. Exactly. And by the way, the warhead on our drones has also gotten bigger. Well, that's just beautiful. And now, the news segment about Crimea from the Crimean partisans. As you know, we've recently established contact with them. Well, actually, the Crimean partisans, the entire partisan movement in Crimea, has a wide network of people who, all of them are bringing victory closer. Some share information, others do something useful there. So, a couple of interesting news items. So, recently, literally on Thursday, the hospital ship Yenisei was put up for sale for 25 million rubles. Attention, it was put up for sale as scrap metal. In other words, the Black Sea Fleet is selling off its ships, and before that, on Friday, they put up the torpedo recovery boat TL-1539 for sale. So the Baklan project. That is, these auctions wouldn't be happening if Russia still had any production capabilities to repair and maintain the fleet. They are already putting ships up for sale one after another, and they will be cut up for scrap. Let me remind you, even Russia's only aircraft-carrying cruiser, Admiral Kuznetsov, will be scrapped. Billions were invested in it, then they decided it will be scrapped. We're going to cut it up. That's all there is to it. The situation with gasoline in Crimea has gotten even worse. They are not bringing gasoline over the Crimean bridge right now. Even electric cars are not allowed to cross. They're afraid that someone might hide explosives in the battery somehow. And they definitely don't transport gasoline over the Crimean bridge. They're afraid it might blow up. So they're hauling this gasoline into Crimea, including to supply the southern group by ferries. And let me remind you, Ukraine has already struck these ferries. If I were in the place of those who operate these ferries, who drive these ferries and thus supply the southern group with fuel, I would recommend finding another job. Both I and the Crimean partisan movement will do everything possible to make sure these ferries don't run anymore. By the way, I'll leave the details of the Crimean partisans in the description so you can help them if you want. So, news from Russia. Every time I open it, I think, my God, can it really get any worse? Yes, it can. Look, in Russia, they're going to make a comedy series about the war in Ukraine. So, they're going to shoot a comedy series about volunteers who go off to fight in Ukraine. And the director said that according to the plot, young soldiers will be trained by an experienced fighter with the call sign Kuba, who doesn't want to teach them. That's what the whole comedy is based on. The news article also notes that Kuba is the pseudonym of a Russian performer who wrote the song Rise Donbass in 2014. And you know, I'm a nitpicker of the highest order. So I found the lyrics to that song, and I read them. And honestly, I probably should have sprinkled my monitor with holy water before reading them. Because there are lines in this so-called masterpiece, in quotation marks. Let me remind you, the song is called Rise Donbass. Mom, how are the workers and miners doing? While people were out on Maidan, our people were working hard and feeding the idlers. Mom, the holy Slavic mountains will help us all. And these will be our cities, ours forever. We won't give them to our enemies. So, this myth that while someone was out protesting, Donbass was feeding all of Ukraine, we've heard this myth before. In fact, Donbass was supposedly feeding all of Ukraine, but once it was occupied by Russia, it can't even feed itself. Not only can it not feed itself, Donbass and Donetsk have turned into a foul dump where water is supplied only once a week and filth is simply left out on the streets. Even the local collaborators are outraged themselves, saying, "What have you turned Donbass, the city, into?" They kept saying for years that Donbass was feeding all of Ukraine, that they were the breadbasket, but now they don't even know how to feed themselves. And that's not all. This isn't even the most cringe-worthy part of this song. Mom, how are things in the land of steppes and slag heaps? I heard that enemies have come to our land and want to destroy everyone as soon as possible. Mom, every city here is familiar to me since childhood. Druzhkovka, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. Now they're just headlines in the news. Donbass, save your children. This song was written back in 2014, and now, about this guy, I don't know what happened to him, but just look at that disgusting face. Turns out, he's a rock musician. I thought it was some rapper singing, but no, he's a rock performer. So, Drushkovka, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, now they're just news headlines. There is no more Drushkovka, Slavyansk, or Kramatorsk. Russia has already saved them. You called for help, and Russia saved them. Turned them into charred ruins. I want to ask those who sang along to that song back then, who came up with it, who called on Putin, how's life for you now? You wanted to see the Russian world? Well, here it is. It came to you and just turned your cities into ruins. By the way, Russians who crawl in here and constantly yell, why did you bomb Donbass for 8 years? Always. I suggest a very simple exercise for them. Look it up. Google what Donetsk looked like before the occupation. And see what it looks like now. In 2014, the Russian world came there. There were almost 12 years to turn it into a garden city. And to bring water there, they simply couldn't even manage to build a water supply system. Putin couldn't find the money for all this time. When things got really bad with the water, he summoned the local officials, pretended to listen, like, well, what should we do? We need water, we need to do something. That's it. That's the Russian world for you. The Russian world is a blight that spreads, and everything it consumes withers and withers away. There's one more exercise for fans of the Russian world, but that's only if you have an acquaintance in occupied Donetsk. Ask them personally. If you were to ask them now, would they have wanted the Russian world to come for Donetsk to end up like this? Just ask them out of curiosity. If you have a relationship of trust with them, you'll be very surprised by their answer. I think that many people there already deeply regret it, and these territories will remain abandoned for decades. That's a fact. Russia won't have the money to rebuild them in any foreseeable future. By the way, this wannabe singer also has a couple of songs, one called Russian Spring and another one called USSR, LNR, DNR. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. So go find this clown, ask him questions, take him around the streets of Donetsk, show him around, take him to Drushkovka, for example. By the way, friends, let me remind you, we're currently running a fundraiser, well, we've almost closed it already, for the first separate medical battalion. For our combat medics, I'm not afraid to use that word, wholly, these are people who risk their own lives but save the lives of defenders. Right now, they have an urgent need for ventilators, so we're already raising funds for a second machine. I ask you to join in. We're collecting for a Falcon 202 ventilator for the frontline surgical team of the 1st Separate Medical Battalion. There's a direct appeal to us and to the viewers of this channel. Please take a look at it.
Апарат штучної вентиляції легень – незамінна річ для надання невідкладної допомоги в умовах бойових дій. Ми в першому окремому медичному батальйоні використовуємо спеціальні портативні системи забезпечення для використання у військових умовах. Це найкращий інструмент, але, на жаль, він не призначений для такого навантаження та роботи в безперебійному режимі, яка є в наших умовах зараз. Тому ці системи починають виходити з ладу. Через це ми потребуємо додаткових звичайних стаціонарних апаратів ШВЛ. Залишитися без них не можна, адже це призведе до серйозних наслідків. Вартість одного апарату – 730 тисяч гривень, а всього потреба є у 8. Разом з каналом Бориса Тізенгаузена збираємо на другий ШВЛ для передових хірургічних груп першого окремого медичного батальйону. Часу обмаль. Розраховуємо на вашу підтримку.
In this case, your donation is literally saving someone's life. And we're doing something truly important. We're in this together. The payment details are in the description of this video. There are mono-private and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. And to each of you, I will never stop saying a huge, heartfelt thank you from me for helping Ukraine and for helping save the lives of our defenders. Thank you so much. Every time I read statements from the Russian side, I get the feeling that they're all completely insane. And now they've decided to criticize the US and Donald Trump for interfering in Venezuela's internal affairs. So none other than Maria Zakharova, the official spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She stated that Moscow is extremely concerned that the US has chosen a military solution to the problem of illegal trafficking in the Caribbean Sea. She said that the planned operation is, attention, blatant interference in Venezuela's internal affairs, and pointed out to Washington that this violates international agreements. Have you ever seen anything like this? I quote, We categorically oppose the use of force or threats as a means of interfering in internal affairs under various pretexts, including the fight against illegal trafficking. We are concerned about the violation of international agreements and consider this interference in internal affairs. You know, I have only one explanation. Medvedev there, the bloodiest war that we started, and so on. Is that Zakharova? I have only one explanation for all these statements, why they make them. So that when they're put on trial, they can say, but I'm insane. Just look at all my statements. No sane person would say such things. That's it. I've completely lost it, cuckoo. The cuckoo band has gone off in some unknown direction. That's it. Pack me off to a mental hospital, not to prison. That's why they're doing it. By the way, we have a segment today called Putin's Patriots. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but there's a public interrogation by Spanish authorities of the son of Artikov, the deputy head of Rostec. He's being interrogated, suspected of money laundering in Spain. The son of the deputy head of Rostec is laundering millions in Spain together with his family, and the interrogation is public. He sits in front of the camera and his response is as follows. He has a residence permit in Spain, he really loves Spain, he pays the luxury tax there, and he says that his father is a very respectable man. Well, the deputy head of Rostec, that's something. He comes to Spain every year. And when he was asked, why did they find 225,000 euros in cash at your house? Why so much, and where did it come from? Do you know what he said? Oh, that is just for the food here, in this place. We spend 1,200 euros a day. These are the truest Putin patriots. From Rostec. Why not in Russia? I don't get it. Why aren't you sitting in Tuapse or on the beach in Anapa? Why are you in Spain? They've bought a ton of real estate there. All the children of Russian officials who are at the trough, they don't vacation in Russia? Well, almost all of them. They're all there. Their real estate is there. Their families, their mistresses, and their children study there, abroad, in the hated, terrible West, where you could just accidentally get bitten by someone and be infected with non-traditional values. That's how they present it to Russians. But they themselves go there, you see? By the way, Medvedev's son actually worked in the US until he was kicked back to Russia. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Subscribing to this channel is important. You subscribe, and I'll keep bringing you calm, analytical episodes every day. And let's talk a bit more about the man-curds. Peter Sijarto stated that Hungary will send 1.5 million euros to Lebanon instead of helping Ukraine. Well, that's pretty clear. I quote, Hungary's national security interests are peace in the Middle East. We will not use our share in the European fund to arm Ukraine. Instead, we will allocate 1.5 million euros to support the Lebanese armed forces, clarified the head of the Hungarian Foreign Ministry. I want to make it clear right away that Hungary has the right to send its share wherever it wants, even if they want to support Hezbollah in Lebanon, for which, of course, they'll get in trouble from just about anyone. But I'd like to remind you that in Hungary, for every euro it contributes to the European Union fund, it gets 2 back. And the statistics tell us the following. In terms of actual consumption levels, this indicator, Hungary shares last place in the European Union, specifically in terms of material household consumption. That's how it is. Hungary shares last place with Bulgaria. So Orban has personal reasons to hate Ukraine. And Ukrainians, by the way. He used to live just fine. He was living large on Russian oil and Russian gas until Russia attacked Ukraine. And most importantly, what really annoys him is that Ukraine didn't surrender quickly. If that had happened, maybe there wouldn't have been such sanctions, and he could have kept buying oil and gas. But Ukraine didn't surrender, and the European Union had to impose sanctions. Well, I mean, it's not like they were absolutely forced to, no, but at first, let's be honest, no one believed Ukraine would hold out. Many European politicians were whispering among themselves, giving Ukraine just a few weeks. After all, it's Russia, it's a giant, wow. But Ukrainians did the impossible. And that's exactly what infuriates Orban. That is, he probably hates it on some subconscious level, or maybe consciously or subconsciously. Russian oil and gas are the 2 pillars that have supported Orban's regime for 14 years now. There's another pillar, of course, control over the media and the courts, but for that, 18 billion from European funds have been frozen for him. Speaking of control over the media and administrative resources, last year I came across a poll. I was shocked, and I remembered it while preparing today's material. According to a 2024 poll, Ukraine is seen by Hungary and Hungarians as a much greater threat than Russia. I just thought, really? But yes, it's true. This was a poll by the Policy Solutions Analytical Center, and Telex wrote about it. So 51% considered Ukraine a bigger threat, and 46% saw Russia as such. Then there's China and the USA further down the list. This is the result of a campaign that Orban conducts through controlled media, so-called shaping polls, where first a propaganda campaign is launched, billboards are put up all over the country, by the way, paid for with taxpayers' money. Things like, Ukraine is terrible, Ukrainians are terrible, they will take money from Hungarians, bring crime, and so on. Then they conduct polls, where in the preamble, one of our viewers actually sent me this poll. Right at the top, there's a preamble that says that basically Brussels is bad, Ukraine is bad. Then come the questions. Recently, Orban received a one-year reprieve from Donald Trump regarding sanctions. In other words, the US won't touch him for a year. Go ahead and buy Russian oil and gas. But my main question is this: why does Orban get a reprieve from the US? Why can't the European Union establish a mechanism? They're already preparing to adopt the 20th package now, to establish a mechanism against those who go against the decisions of everyone else in the European Union. Do you know why? Because everything has to be decided collectively. The vote must be unanimous. Even if they try to adopt something against Orban, Hungary can veto it. Here, and I always say this, I do not equate Hungarians with Orban. No. And I often get messages from Hungary and receive various materials. Thank you for that, for supporting Ukraine. So for Orban, it's simple. Russian oil means everything to him. Without it, he might not win the elections next year anyway, but without Russian oil and gas, that's it. It's all over. And what has he done there over the past 14 years? And now investigations will start. Who did what, where? Why is it that despite buying energy resources at the lowest prices in the European Union, the people of Hungary are at the very bottom in terms of living standards? How did it end up like this? Basically, he just uses internal rules for blackmail. He sabotages the decisions of the entire European Union, and on various issues at that, on sanctions against Russia, on aid to Ukraine. And he says, I'll give my consent, unfreeze the funds, give me some money. Just imagine for a second that your company has several dozen employees, and the final result depends on the work of each one. And now it's time to turn in the work. One of your employees says, well, I'm not going to submit my part of the work, and that means nothing will get done. No decision will be made. The project won't be delivered. I don't know. The plan won't be implemented. I just won't do it unless you give me a raise. How long would you keep such an employee in your company? And in addition, Sijato also stated, just to add to that Hungary will not allow the Ukrainian mafia into the European Union, nor low-quality Ukrainian grain onto the European market. Oh, what kind of scumbag do you have to be? Excuse my French. The country is bleeding, Ukraine. The best sons and daughters of Ukraine are dying. Ukraine's cities are being wiped out by that bald ghoul. And you sit there and stab Ukraine in the back, huh? What kind of rod do you have to be, huh? I think, let me tell you this. Ukraine forgets neither good nor evil. And as for the European Union, I mentioned the 20th package. They are working on the 20th package of sanctions against Russia. And soon it will be, well, in general, apparently we need to pay close attention to those who help Russia circumvent these sanctions, not just to imposing them. Sanctions should also be imposed on an industrial scale, but it's even better to hit those who help Russia get around these sanctions. By the way, more and more regions in Russia are being cut off from mobile internet. In fact, the original plan was to completely shut down external internet and to leave only approved websites by 2030. That's closer to yet another round of Putin's fake elections. Because once again, they'll be electing Putin. The year 2030, I think he set his sights at least until 2036, or maybe even further, so that his kids will be grown up by then. And he can hand over power to them. This paranoid guy. But they decided to speed things up. That is, apparently, their economic forecasts have gotten a bit they're being pushed forward. And not only are they shutting off mobile internet in various regions of Russia, they're also taking control over the possible transmission of messages from Russians. They're introducing this national messenger app right now. They're rolling it out, and then they'll shut down all the other messengers, believe me. Soon everyone will have it, and then they'll cut off everything else. Why? Well, because it's not as scary if someone finds out the real truth, not the one the propagandists tell on TV, but if people start communicating with each other somehow, uniting, organizing protest movements, and so on and so on. Although I don't really believe it will work, they've decided to take total control. Now, apparently they've already set up the legal framework so that they can shut down external internet access, and they'll disconnect it by next spring. It's kind of like, a North Korean style equivalent. The internet, Quan-man, as I've mentioned before, is basically a completely isolated Russian internet. There are only approved websites you can visit, and that's it. No Western sites, no social networks, nothing like that. Plus, now they're going to control uploads as well, so it'll be just like North Korea. It'll be just wonderful. You'll need to get a permit just to upload a photo. In short, the balding moth has decided to play it safe. But this tells us that the regime in Russia is tightening the screws as much as possible. For some reason, it's afraid of its own citizens. It's afraid of everything. It's afraid that some other truth from the outside will get in. Basically, it's afraid of everything. It's no wonder Putin has dug himself bunkers all over the country. And it's no wonder he's built identical offices everywhere. I've talked about this. There's an investigation about it. Laughter. He really does have identical offices in different locations so that no one knows where to send a drone or a Neptune missile to his balding little office. See how scared he is, how terrified that little creep is. Friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's help our combat medics. They are really amazing. They are awesome, brave, and bright people. Let me remind you, the details for donations are in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.